Welcome back to Smarty Van. Today we're at the Clark Fork River in Montana. My name's Mike and I live with my partner Shar in our 2022 home motivated DIY Sprinter build. Today we're talking Home Assistant. We'll get it installed on a Raspberry Pi and we'll take a look around the interface. There are chapter markers if you need to skip the installation section or any others. And don't forget to check out the poll on our page to decide which of the features in our van we're going to dig into next. Let's get to work. Okay, we're back in the van studio, and today we're finally going to take a look at how to get Home Assistant up and running on this with this. In the first video, we showed you what was possible in our van. In the second video, I talked a little bit about why we chose Home Assistant. So now that we've settled on Home Assistant, we've chosen our hardware, let's get it installed. Assuming you chose the Raspberry Pi and the micro SD card approach, then we're going to take a look at homeassistant.io/installation. We're going to go down to the Raspberry Pi section here and look at their tutorial. This is going to link us to the Raspberry Pi software installer. I'm going to click this link here and we're going to download the Raspberry Pi Imager. I'm downloading from Mac OS. Okay, when that's downloaded, we're going to open that app up and we're going to insert our micro SD card into a card reader. There we go. All right. Raspberry Pi Imager makes this super easy. All you have to do is select your device. In this case, I'm using a Raspberry Pi 4, but if you got a Raspberry 5, you'll select that here. So I'm going to choose the Raspberry Pi 4. Raspberry Pi already provides all the open source OSs directly into this installer. I'm going to go down here and find other specific purpose OSs like home automation, 3D printing, etc. Let's look in this category. And we're looking for Home Assistants and home automation. And then there's Home Assistant. I'm going to choose Home Assistant. And we are choosing Home Assistant OS 13.1 for a Raspberry Pi 4. In the storage, we're going to select the generic storage device. This happens to be the 128 gigabyte micro SD card that I inserted into the card reader. So we'll select that and we'll click next. And it's just going to confirm that we're going to overwrite the entire contents of that card. We type in our password here and off we go. This is going to take a few minutes, so we'll check back in when it's done.
A few moments later.
Okay, looks like it's finally done. The OS has been written to the storage device and we can now remove the SD card from the reader. We'll click continue. I'm going to pop out that little SD card, this little tiny guy, and we are going to simply insert it to the back of the Raspberry Pi. This is partly why I chose the SD card, because that's the size of it right there. So we don't have to have an SSD hanging off this device in a van. We're putting this in our electronics cabinet and I want to keep things as small as possible. You can connect SSD drives to some of these USB ports and use that to boot from, but isn't that tiny and nice? And again, if you get the Max Endurance card from SanDisk, this should last a really long time. We're using this card not only for our Home Assistant install, we're also using it as the DVR for our security cameras. So that means this card is getting written to a lot and we've had it running for a couple of years now, no problems. But I do carry a backup. Okay, now we got to power this guy up. I happen to have right here a USB-C power supply and an Ethernet cable that goes right into our router. So I'm going to pop this in Ethernet and USB-C power, and our server is booting. All right, I'm going to set that aside here while that powers up. That's going to take just a minute. The first time you power up your Raspberry Pi, it needs to be connected via Ethernet so that you can connect to the device and configure it to connect to your Wi-Fi. So that's why I've got it connected to Ethernet right now, but once you've done the initial configuration, you can operate it on Wi-Fi. I do recommend leaving it on Ethernet if you can, right into your router. That's going to create really fast connection that's really reliable. Probably take a couple minutes for the Raspberry Pi to do its initial boot, but once it does, you can generally go to homeassistant.local:8123. That's the port number 8123, and that'll take you directly to your setup. But since I already have a Home Assistant server running on this network, I'm going to take a look at my router and find the IP address so we can go there directly. I know these two are my Home Assistant installs that are already running, so this one must be the new one. So the IP address ends at 172. I'm going to grab that IP address and I'm going to go over to a new browser window and we're going to type in that address with the port number 8123. And that's going to take us right to the web UI of our brand new Home Assistant server. Okay, and there we go. Our Raspberry Pi is running Home Assistant. So the welcome screen here just says, do we want to start from the beginning or do we want to restore from a backup? In this case, you might be starting from the beginning, but if I had a problem with my Raspberry Pi and I wanted to restore a backup that I had to get the van back up and running, I would click Restore from Backup and get things going again. Let's start from scratch. Okay, I'm going to create a user here. Let's do password. Okay, and we'll create our account. So choosing a location is important for a few reasons, but it's static. So once you set this, you can go back and change it in the settings menu. It's just not going to follow you around if you're in a vehicle. So we're going to do some fun things later to update the location as we go. For now, you can set this to wherever you are at the moment for testing purposes. All right, we'll set it to Seattle for the moment. That's fine. So from here, the developers are going to ask for some anonymized data to help in the development of the platform. It's up to you whether you want to allow this. When Home Assistant first starts, it's going to scan your network and look for compatible devices that it finds. In this case, I've got a bunch of things set up in the van, so they're discovered here. All right, so we're at the dashboard. Right out of the box, Home Assistant gives you an overview dashboard. This has every known sensor to the platform already listed here, which is just 2. There's me as a person, which it doesn't even know where I am because I haven't provided it any way to track me, and it knows the weather because it has an internet connection and I've told it where we are, at least in theory. And if we click on that, you can see that that comes with attributes such as daily and hourly forecast and some other temperature sensors and air pressure, humidity, etc. So right now, those are the only 2 things available to us, and by default, all known sensors are added to the overview dashboard. And if you add new sensors, they'll show up here automatically. In the future, we can add our own dashboards or modify this one to add or remove sensors that we'd like. So let's just go down this left column really quick. We talked about the overview. The map is going to show any device that has a location available on the map. In this case, home is apparently Seattle. That's the only device tracker we have at the moment. The energy grid page will allow you to configure some of your input and output sensors that have to do with energy to show your home's consumption. We can do this in the case of a van or an automobile, but I don't find myself using this page very often. The logbook is literally a log of everything that's happened in a chronological order on the server. History is another way of looking at the state changes of a given sensor. You can filter this down once you have a lot of sensors to look at a particular sensor or area, which we'll talk about, over a set amount of time, and then you'll see the history of that sensor. We don't really have any sensors right now that have any states, so this isn't so useful yet. The media page eventually becomes useful as we try to access sounds and other media that we want to play back on our server or on another device. And Home Assistant now comes with built-in to-do list integration. It can be useful, and we actually use it for some things in the van. Down at the bottom, we see developer tools. This becomes really useful as you move forward and get deeper into the development of your home automation network. The first tab is YAML. YAML stands for yet another markup language, and that is the markup language that Home Assistant uses to configure all of its parameters for every integration and device and automation and really everything that happens on the server. And here you can reload those configurations category by category. We'll dig into that later, but this is where you're going to end up a lot when you're in the testing and development phase. The States tab is going to let you look at the state of every entity in your server, as well as its attributes. So let's take a look at one of these states, like the sun. If we click on the sun here, we can see that the sun's current state is below the horizon. It's dark outside at the moment. Then we see date timestamps below that for the next dawn, next dusk, and next midnight. These are called attributes of the sensor. So the sensor has its main state, which is below the horizon, and then it has attributes that go along with that main state. As it says here, the Actions tab lets you perform any action that's available in Home Assistant, so it's a place where you can come to simulate actions. The Templates tab is extremely useful, and I find myself spending a lot of time here. Home Assistant uses something called Jinja 2 to process templates, so this is the format of templates in Home Assistant. And Jinja is the engine that processes these templates. So these are some of the examples that load by default, and you can kind of follow along in the template editor and what results on the right side. Eventually, we're going to be processing templates to try to extract information about our sensors, and this is a good place to come to test those ideas and to double check your syntax to make sure you're getting the result that you expected. I'm not going to get into events, statistics, and assist at the moment. Those are pretty deep dive things for now, but I just wanted to give you a peek into the developer tools because we spend a lot of time here as you're getting your system set up. In the Settings tab, we can access everything that goes on behind the scenes. This is also where we're going to add new devices, new integrations, and add-ons, and set system settings. Home Assistant Cloud is something I mentioned in one of the earlier videos, which is run by Nabukasa. When you sign up and sign in, this will allow you to have remote, secure access to this Home Assistant installation from anywhere in the world. This will work in a van as long as your van is connected to the internet, so it's really nice to have. You're going to end up spending a lot of time in devices and services. The first tab here is integrations. This is basically pieces of software that allow you to interact with other software or hardware available to Home Assistant. We already have some things discovered because they're on the same network as this new Home Assistant server I'm running. So these are things that automatically were discovered, but if you wanted to set up your own integrations, you could go down here and click Add Integration. There are literally thousands of them, and we're going to touch on them as we go. At the bottom are your already configured integrations, and these are a small set that come with Home Assistant out of the box. Devices is a place where you can see every device available on your Home Assistant server. The concept here is that when you add a device, it will have entities, and those entities will have states. Entities can be of a variety of types. Some of the basic ones are switches, binary sensors, and sensors. The Devices tab will show you every device on your Home Assistant server. Right now, there's only a few here, and those are provided by the integrations in the tab on the left. Helpers allow you to add things like a button, a counter, a date and time, a dropdown, a group, or let's say a text sensor, that if you need to store an arbitrary piece of information, you can set up a helper and save it there. These become really powerful, but we'll have to talk about those in practice once we get to it. The next area that you're going to end up spending a lot of time once you get some devices and services set up is the automations and scene area. Here, we can set up automations. Automations are basically recipes. If this happens, then do this. Scenes just capture the state of a bunch of entities so that you can recall those states all at once, like a movie watching mode where the lights dim and the projector comes on and the screen comes down. Scripts don't have the if part of the if this then that. They're just a series of actions that you can call arbitrarily from, say, an automation. Blueprints are often provided by the community, and they give you sort of a template to help create an automation based on certain entities available in your setup. The next area down is called Areas, Labels, and Zones. I don't find myself using this as much, but if you set it up, it is kind of helpful to group things together. Areas are literally supposed to be areas of your house, and in this case, in the van, I do have areas defined because it helps to put things like lights in those areas. So when you're automating, you can say, turn off all the lights in the kitchen. And if you've added new lights over time to the area kitchen, that automation will still catch all those lights. Labels is a relatively new feature to Home Assistant, and it just allows you to categorize things to help you when you're looking at large lists of various things like entities to sort and organize them. Zones have to do with geofencing. We don't end up using zones a lot in our van because we live full time and our van is always moving, so we don't really enter or exit any zones. Let's say you're not a full-timer and you want to bring your van home and have certain things happen. You can set your home location, so once you define your van and it has a device tracker and that device enters this home zone, then you can trigger things with an automation. Next is add-ons. These are different from integrations in that they're actually like full pieces of software. There aren't any that are installed by default, but if we look at the add-on store, you can kind of get an idea of what's available. We're definitely going to be looking at the MQTT broker called Mosquito Broker, and I'm sure we'll be looking at ESP Home. This one's really important if you're going to use custom hardware to do almost anything. ESP Home is an amazing set of tools that lets you take a basic microprocessor and control I/O like relays, or communicate over CAN bus for the Rixon's heat system. The last thing we're going to look at for today is dashboards. This is where you come to manage your dashboards. When we first started up Home Assistant, we looked at the overview dashboard, which by default gets every entity added to it. Here though, we could add a new dashboard. So let's add a dashboard from scratch, and we're going to just call it van, and let's give it an icon of a van. So we'll see that pop up in our sidebar, and we can click on van. This is an empty dashboard. So let's go find something in our van to add to this dashboard so that we can look at our first device and entity. So I'm going to go back to settings, and I'm going to go to devices and services. And let's pick one of these devices that was discovered on our network. This is an ESP Home device, and it's a microprocessor with 4 relays connected to it. So let's configure it. So we're going to click submit. Okay, I've got the encryption key here, and I'm going to submit that. Great, we've had success. So now that device is going to show up down here in the configured section of the ESP Home integration. We have one device integrated. So when we click on that device, we'll see that it's called Electrical Relay Box, and it has a few entities. There are 4 switches. One is to turn our cameras off and on, one is for Starling power, one is for subwoofer, and the 4th switch is unused. Down below that, there are 2 entities that are in the diagnostics category. These both have to do with the Wi-Fi signal strength. So let's say we want to add these controls to a dashboard. Well, we've created this van dashboard, so I'm going to click Add to Dashboard, and I'm going to choose the van dashboard. We'll click Next. And Home Assistant suggests the type of card that seems the most appropriate to add these to your dashboard. For now, this is fine. Let's add it to dashboard. Okay, so if we go over to our van dashboard, we have our first set of controls on a dashboard. By default, it added all 4 of those switches from the electrical relay box. It also added a switch for the entire electrical relay box that if we turn this off, will turn off all 4 switches or turn them all on in unison. So let's edit that really quick. So if we click the little edit pencil at the top here, and then we edit this card, we can turn off show header toggle. That way we're not accidentally turning all of these off and on at the same time. This also gives us a chance to rename this. In the case of switch 4, I'm not using it, so maybe we'll go down here and we'll remove this entity. Now it's only the 3 that we want, and we'll click save. If we're finished, we'll click done, and we see that we've updated this card. If we want to add another card, we're going to need another device. I thought another easy one to test would be a Shelly. I use these throughout the van to control LED lights. We probably have 6 or 7 of these. These are called Shelly RGB-W2s, and they're 4-channel LED drivers. They have an R, G, B, and W channel, as well as a 12-volt in, ground, and an input for a switch. So you could attach a switch to this and control it with a manual switch. This is an RGB-W driver, but it has a mode available that allows you to turn each of the 4 color channels into a single color channel driver, so these can effectively drive 4 different light strips. So let's add one of the Shellys that we already have under the bench here to our new Home Assistant install. So we'll go back to the settings page, devices and services, and we're gonna look for the Shelly that I know controls the light right above me. All right, that's this one here. Configure that, and we're gonna click submit. And finish. Now in our configured devices, we'll see that we have the Shelly integration added with one device. If we click on that device, we see that we have dinette overhead light. I can turn that off and back on. Great. The other 3 channels in this case are unused, so they're just called channel 2, 3, and 4. So we could actually go into channel 2, go into the settings, and say that we don't need that enabled because we're not using it. We could do the same for 3, enable, update, and 4, enabled, and update. Now those 3 are hidden so they're not cluttering up the interface. Shellys come with their own firmware, and they have a web interface for configuring them. So I'll click visit here just to show you how that looks. I'm not gonna go too deep into a Shelly configuration at the moment, but this is what it'll look like if you set one up. If we go back to our van dashboard, let's add that light to the dashboard. We're gonna hit the pencil to edit this dashboard. We're gonna add a card. You can either search by the type of card, which there are many of, or we can choose by entity. Let's choose our new dinette overhead light and hit continue. Home Assistant is suggesting a very simple entity type card for the light, but maybe we want to pick a different card, like this light card. Okay, great. So the entity is already chosen here, and we can name it. We want to just simplify that to dinette. We can change the icon to light, and let's pick this one. And then we'll click save. So now we've added a second card to our Home Assistant dashboard, and that is to control a light on a Shelly. So we can see we can dim it up, and we can click it to turn it off. I know we're just scraping the surface here, getting a Shelly light set up and a couple switches for ESP Home, but this is really the foundation of how Home Assistant works. You're gonna take different devices from different brands or ones that you create using ESP Home, and you're gonna bring them into a dashboard and configure them the way you like. The next big step is to automate these things so that one thing affects the other. Let's take a really quick look at a basic automation just to give you a taste. All right, we're gonna go over to this settings tab and go down to automation and scenes, and we're gonna create an automation. Let's create a new automation. There's 3 sections to an automation. There's the when something happens, and if these conditions are true or false, then we're gonna perform an action. So let's say when our entity state of the subwoofer changes to on, then we're going to toggle the dinette light. And we'll click save. And we're going to call this toggle dinette when subwoofer on. Save. Okay, let's go to our van dashboard and see if this works. So we'll click the subwoofer button, and there goes our light. And we turn the subwoofer back off, and that's not captured by the automation because we only wanted to know when the subwoofer was turned on. So if we turn the subwoofer back on again, our light is going to toggle. This is a ridiculous automation, of course, but hopefully it starts to give you an idea of what you can do with the power of automations and scripting. All right, this might seem like an overly simplified view of Home Assistant, but hopefully this helps get everyone up to the same level so we can dig into some of the more complicated things. So if you don't have anything to automate yet, maybe grab yourself a Shelly RGB-W2 and a strip of LEDs so that you can try it out. There are a ton of other ways to control LEDs, but this one's particularly cool if you want to retrofit your van because this is connected to your server via Wi-Fi. All right, I'm going to leave some links to products and guides in the description below. And don't forget to check out the poll on the channel page to help decide what we're going to look at next. So far, it looks like electromagnetic drawer locks have the edge, but weigh in and let me know which of the things that we've done in our van that you want to see a detailed breakdown on in the next video. All right, until next time, safe travels.